At the heart of this story is the glaring injustice. An honest federal detective, Michael Reed, finds himself betrayed and accused by the very police network he sought to protect. Lieutenant Harris, once a trusted mentor, masterminds a campaign of manipulation and secrecy that shakes the core of justice, leaving the city in disbelief. But a hidden wire recording becomes Reed's secret weapon, silently capturing the truth when all hope seemed lost. Just wait for the powerful twist that brings justice roaring back into the light. This is a reckoning you won't want to miss. A respected federal detective faces the ultimate betrayal as his own police colleagues turn against him, trapping him in a web of false accusations and isolation. Lieutenant Harris, driven by fear and loyalty to a corrupt system, manipulates everyone around him, forcing the city to question the meaning of justice. But Michael Reed's hidden wire captures the truth no one expected, flipping the story upside down at its darkest moment. The powerful resolution will remind you why justice is worth fighting for, and why this is a story you'll feel long after it ends. Michael Reed stepped into the Aurora precinct as evening fell, not suspecting that his world was about to turn upside down. He had made this walk countless times before, always with a sense of purpose. Today was no different, or so it seemed. As a federal detective, Reed was known for his razor-sharp instincts and unshakable sense of justice, but the palpable unease among his colleagues struck him immediately. Soft conversations quieted as he passed, and familiar faces looked away, leaving him with a loneliness he could not quite explain. He had come to law enforcement to fight the corruption that had once destroyed his father's career, and that motivation was the foundation of every decision Michael made. For years he'd worked alongside Lieutenant Stephen Harris, a leader who once mentored him with pride, but now regarded him with guarded professionalism. Harris summoned Reed into his office, tone icy, face unreadable. 4 officers loomed nearby, once co-workers he trusted, now silent sentinels surrounding him. Questions came, fast and precise. Harris asked for the details of Reed's most recent investigation, then about financial forms, case files, phone records. With growing disbelief, Reed realized the allegations were not only unfounded, they were manufactured. Documents he'd never seen were presented as evidence. Harris accused him of manipulating results, of working outside the law, and the weight of each accusation pressed heavier on Reed's shoulders. Reed tried to defend himself, citing procedure, intent, and transparency, but found his words caught in the echo chamber of suspicion. The air was thick and still, and when Harris gave the signal, the officers moved to quietly restrain Reed. The cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists, and the simple reality of his arrest dropped like a stone in his stomach. The dignity of his role, the camaraderie of the precinct, the hope he represented, they all seemed to crumble in those moments. Each officer who had greeted him mere hours before now focused on following orders, eyes downward, avoiding the difficult truth of the scene unfolding. Michael did not protest. Instead, he fought to maintain composure. Memories flashed through his mind. Nights working late on unsolved cases, the triumphs and failures that had built his character, the trust he had once felt here. He remembered the hidden wire beneath his jacket, set up days before on a hunch, its faint buzz promising a thread of hope. He focused on breathing deeply, swallowing anger, refusing to let humiliation shatter his resolve. In the holding cell, reality pressed in from all sides. Reed found himself alone, stripped of any authority, with only the echo of his own heart pounding in the small dark room. The psychological pain, the betrayal by those he thought allies, gnawed at him even more than the physical discomfort of the cuffs. He retraced every step of the last few weeks, searching for the moment this plot had begun, pondering who might be behind it and what injustice they were desperate to hide. The hours dragged on. Reed remembered his father's teachings, never let rage or despair take the lead. He pressed his back against the cool stone wall, grounding himself as best he could. He thought of everything at stake, not just his own freedom but the mission he lived for, restoring faith in justice. The station was quiet, But in that silence, the secret recorder beneath his coat was gathering every word, every threat, every false allegation. Despite the depth of pain and the isolation, Reed hardened his resolve. He would survive this night. He would ensure that the truth he bore would come to light, no matter the cost, no matter the agony endured in darkness. And somewhere beyond these walls, he hoped that someone would listen, believe, and fight beside him until justice could prevail. Michael Reed awoke in the windowless cell, his mind caught between fatigue and dread. The events of the previous night returned in vivid detail, and he grappled with the reality of his situation. He was no longer a respected detective. He was a suspect, isolated from the world he'd given everything to. For a moment he simply watched the shifting shadows on the bare wall, hoping for an explanation that would make sense of everything. Outside, the precinct came alive with its usual rhythms, but for Reed, each sound, the metallic click of a lock, the distant murmur of conversation was tinged with menace. His hope for rescue ebbed as hours passed. Although Reed had always believed in the power of truth and procedure, each minute spent in captivity tested his faith. The only thing keeping despair at bay was the knowledge that somewhere, silently, his wire was recording every conversation, the threats, the admissions, the small betrayals hidden in tone. Lieutenant Harris moved through the station with a new sense of authority. The position gave him command over more than procedures. It allowed him to direct the flow of information, to control who could see what evidence and what stories reached the outside world. Harris's personal motivation had long been wrapped up in loyalty. Now that loyalty demanded protecting the department, even if it meant sacrificing someone who had once been like family. For Harris, maintaining the reputation of the precinct was paramount. He justified every decision as necessary for the greater good. Shift by shift, rumors about Reed were seeded throughout the department and into the surrounding community. Colleagues who once trusted him began to question his motives, their opinions shaped by whispers and strategic leaks. As Reed sat alone, he sensed the chilling power of manipulation, the ease with which perception could be molded, how quickly suspicion grew in people who had never doubted before. The psychological toll of this isolation bore down on him. He wanted to cry out against the injustice, but he understood that a single misstep would play into Harris's plan. Officer Nadia Price, one of the few remaining friends Reed had in Aurora, struggled with her own loyalties. She remembered Reed from the earliest days of her career, his expertise, his integrity, his support when she faced prejudice and skepticism. But in the weeks leading up to his arrest, she had been warned to keep her distance, told that any association would reflect poorly on her. As the allegations piled up, she watched her colleagues turn cold and defensive, afraid for their own positions. Every secret meeting, every coded message exchanged in passing, left her with a growing sense that she was trapped, unable to act, unable to truly help. As Harris prepared the official statement for the media, a squad room full of officers rehearsed their lines. Each word was chosen for effect, each fact carefully altered to fit the narrative. Reed's fall from grace was presented as clear evidence that corruption had infected even the highest levels, and the community responded with outrage and shame. Former allies in the community cancelled meetings with Reed's friends, and every news update painted him as the villain. Throughout this ordeal, Reed's mind remained sharp. He replayed every conversation, searching for signs of weakness in Harris's plan. Alone in the cell, he strategized his response, rehearsing ways to stay composed and useful when the next round of questioning began. He reminded himself that the person most likely to bring the truth to light would not be a stranger, but someone inside the department itself, someone who could not quite ignore their conscience. The pressure within the station grew heavier. Several officers became visibly anxious, second-guessing their roles in the drama, but none dared openly challenge the narrative. Reed's isolation was not just physical, but social and emotional. He was left to bear the full weight of accusation, while the network around Harris solidified. In the midst of his despair, Reed remembered the wire and the possibility that its recordings would be delivered to federal investigators. The device was his only shield, his only means of making the truth heard, without shouting against a storm. Late at night, Reed finally allowed himself to reflect on why the attack against his reputation had been so effective. He understood that the corrupt network was built not only on greed, but on fear, fear of exposure, fear of losing status, fear of facing the consequences of past choices. Harris and his closest associates believed they were defending the sanctity of the institution. In reality, they were fighting against the values they claimed to uphold. As dawn approached, Reed resolved to endure with dignity and caution. He owed the truth to the people he once protected, to the friends who still believed in him, and most of all to himself. He recognized the terrible strength of the network that held him captive, but with every new day, his wire quietly captured another fragment of evidence, a silent witness to the battles unfolding behind closed doors. Reed waited, fought to remain patient, and believed, even as hope flickered in the darkness, that eventually the truth would find its way to the surface. Day after day, Michael Reed waited in his cell, his thoughts sharpening as he watched and listened, searching for any sign that the tide might turn. He understood that his wire was relentlessly gathering evidence, a hidden observer in the heart of the precinct. The suspenseful, methodical tone of this chapter amplifies the building tension and the subtle hope that grows beneath Reed's measured patience, highlighting the relentless courage needed to challenge powerful adversaries. Unknown to Harris and his circle, technology proved to be the best ally for justice. The wire, activated before Reed's arrest, steadily recorded heated exchanges, off-the-record threats, and the confidence with which corrupt officers discussed their control. Reed endured the monotony of isolation, pushing himself to remember names, connections, and details that would matter once the truth was ready to surface. Then one unexpected afternoon, a minor technical error gave Reed a chance. The precinct's server briefly connected to an outside network, allowing a backup file from Reed's hidden wire to reach federal investigators monitoring the case from afar. Agent Julia Monroe, sharp and driven by her own experiences of institutional betrayal, was first to hear the recordings. Monroe recognized the gravity of the admissions, the weight of the conspiracy, and the simple courage woven into Reed's collected words. Within hours, federal agents began an inquiry, quietly contacting trusted colleagues inside the Aurora precinct. Monroe kept the investigation silent, knowing the risks, but she also recognized the urgent need to protect Reed before Harris's group learned what had happened. Inside the station, tension mounted as officers felt the change in atmosphere. Whispers gathered around the possibility of intervention from outside. Harris, accustomed to total control, misread the shift, focusing on minor details and blaming junior colleagues for missteps. Reed was summoned for brief, tense conversations where Harris doubled down on the official narrative, refusing to consider any possibility that the truth might surface. Despite fatigue and frustration, Reed remained composed, answering only when absolutely necessary, always aware that any hasty reaction could be used against him. Officer Nadia Price, emboldened by news of Monroe's interest, reached out to trusted federal contacts. Her loyalty to Reed and her own integrity overcame her fear of reprisal. Nadia shared what she knew of Harris's behind-the-scenes dealings, providing critical context to federal investigators. The network of corruption trembled as small cracks formed in its armor. Monroe gathered a team and prepared to take decisive action. The wire's recordings played a pivotal role. They laid bare patterns of manipulation, admissions of dishonest conduct, and moments when Harris and his closest allies confessed to running a system based on reputation, not truth. For Reed, hope flared in the knowledge that his trust in technology and in the importance of patient endurance was finally being rewarded. As news of the inquiry and mounting evidence filtered through the station, officers who had stayed silent began to question their allegiance. Some withdrew, fearful of the growing scrutiny. Others quietly vowed to support the investigation. Reed, still isolated, sensed the emerging shift. His pain and effort had not been wasted. The climax arrived as federal agents entered the precinct with warrants and recorded proof. Harris, faced with the undeniable reality of Reed's recordings, lost composure for the first time. The foundation of the corrupt network crumbled, leaving Reed not vindictive but relieved. Eventually he walked free, worn but resolute, with the knowledge that persistence and quiet strength had pierced through adversity, setting the stage for the final resolution and the restoration of justice. For Michael Reed, freedom did not bring immediate relief. Stepping out of the precinct, he felt the weight of the ordeal etched into every thought and movement. The aftermath was not defined by dramatic confrontations, but by a slow, painstaking restoration of truth, of dignity, and of faith in the values he had lived by since childhood. The measured, introspective tone of this chapter reflects the gravity of the situation, focusing on the emotional catharsis and the subtle process of reclaiming one's life from the shadow of betrayal. News of the federal investigation swept through the city, reaching every corner where rumors and doubts had once thrived. Friends and former colleagues grappled with the revelations, uncertain how they could have participated, even passively, in Reed's ordeal. The community, shocked and divided, confronted uncomfortable questions about loyalty, authority, and trust. Though the official statements apologized for the wrongful accusations and pledged reforms, Reed understood that true change would only come through persistent effort and honest dialogue. The courtroom became the center of both justice and reckoning. Each day, Reed sat quietly. The recordings from his wire played for all to hear. Harris and his associates attempted to discredit the evidence, but their words, once spoken with confidence behind closed doors, were now laid bare before the public. Reed listened, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with slow-building anger, as the court unpacked the network's operations. He recognized familiar faces among the spectators: Nadia Price, who had risked her position to make the truth known; Agent Monroe, whose tenacity had driven the federal inquiry; and community leaders who once doubted him, but now returned to support his pursuit of justice. As testimony unfolded, Reed reflected not just on the structure of corruption, but on the motivations which had enabled it: fear of scrutiny, misplaced loyalty, desperation for approval, and a collective hesitation to challenge authority. Yet witnessing the unraveling of Harris's network brought no vindictiveness, only a growing sense of relief and purpose. With every admission and every fragment of evidence validated, Reed felt the pain begin to lift, replaced by a quieter determination. The verdict came after weeks of public trial. Harris and his closest allies faced sentences that would remove them from positions of influence for years. Reed received formal apologies from the department and federal authorities, recognition of the suffering he had endured, and reinstatement to active service. But the true resolution was not found in paperwork or legal judgments. Reed knew that the ordeal had left scars, but he chose to face them openly, addressing public forums, speaking with younger officers, and participating in conversations about institutional reform. He returned to the precinct not as a triumphant hero, but as a changed man. The building felt different. Some old friends had moved on. Others greeted him with hesitant respect. Nadia, steadfast and brave, became his partner in building a new culture drawn from transparency and ethical conduct. Together, they initiated peer review sessions, encouraged open debate, and shared their story with those who needed hope. Reed's father, once wronged by the very system Michael had challenged, attended one of these workshops, a silent nod of pride and understanding passing between generations. Reed's story became a point of reflection for the city. Community leaders invited him to advise on policies meant to protect others from suffering the fate he endured. Media reached out, seeking interviews that reframed the narrative away from scandal toward persistence, courage, and the pursuit of truth against odds. At home, Reed found ordinary moments: making coffee, walking with Nadia, speaking quietly with Monroe about future cases, now carried a new significance. He kept the wire that saved him, not as a token of pain, but as a symbol of the importance of vigilance and integrity. The scars did not disappear, but were carried with conviction, reminders that even the strongest systems must be guarded and improved. In the final days of his recovery, Reed stood before a gathering of young recruits, sharing not technical advice but the lessons of endurance, empathy, and the power of believing in justice despite everything. He did not promise that hardship would always end in victory, only that honesty and perseverance were the keys to surviving darkness. The catharsis in Reed's journey came not from triumph alone, but from the acceptance that meaning can be found in adversity, and that truth, though sometimes battered, will always find its way through the silence. It was then that Michael Reed truly recovered his sense of self, not because the wounds had vanished, but because he had faced the worst and emerged with renewed faith, determined to stand as a guardian of the very ideals that had once been used against him.